the Gentile times so far as Jerusalem is concerned. So this sets a fixed and definite time that Messiah gave us to know when the times of the Gentiles were filled to the full and that final generation would begin. He said, most certainly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things are accomplished. And he even includes his return in those things that he says would be accomplished. So we know from this, we know from history now, when the end of the age began, and that was June 7th, 1967, with the liberation of Jerusalem. Well, now we go into Revelation 4 and 5, and we find at the end of that 40-year judgment period, things move and change very quickly. This is what John writes. Revelation 4:1. After these things, I looked and saw a door opened in heaven, and the first voice that I heard, like a shofar, speaking with me, was one saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must happen after this. Now notice the words here indicating that this is moving in chronological order. It's very important to realize this. When it says after these things, it's talking about after the events of Revelation 1 through 3. In other words, the judgment of the churches. And then he's about to show us things that happen after this. So Revelation here is moving in chronological order. And it's important for us to understand this because dispensational theology would tell us that these things have been going on since 2,000 years ago, and that there really is no real order to the book of Revelation. But that isn't true. It is moving in chronological order. So as we look at this, we're going to continue to see how this moves forward. Now, I would just like to mention that, of course, if we're moving now through time chronologically after that 40 years period, the year that started in 2007, in the spring of 2007, ended in the spring of 2008. Now, this is what's called a Shemitah year, that year, a year of release. And in the spring of that year, I had really an amazing experience. And it was an experience that seemed as if the door was opened and I entered right into heaven to see these same events that John saw. Now, I see this as a vision that I had that was as if it was real, but I don't really know exactly. I do believe about these events that these are pictures of real things. In other words, this is written in symbolic language about real spiritual realities, and we're going to look at some of these. I also want to mention that this was a very important year, 2008, and I've explained this in radio program number 301, Chariot on the Move. And this is Ezekiel's prophecy, and this prophecy can be shown very clearly to be a period of 2,730 years in which Israel would be scattered because of their iniquity, and that this iniquity would come to an end in the year 2008 AD. So right in time now for Yeshua to turn his attention to the remnant of Israel, the scattered remnant of Israel. Quite amazing timing. Yeshua then removed the second seal. Now, these were all removed very rapidly with these horsemen. They all went out very close to the same time. And these next three horsemen are all forces of the world. Whereas the first horseman is really sent out to the scattered remnant of Israel because It's for Israel, represents Israel, as we've seen from those verses. The next three are really forces of the world. And what this means is something kind of amazing. What it means is that essentially by removing these seals, Yeshua is simply allowing them to do what they want to do. And what they want to do isn't very good, as we will see. So we wonder, why is all of this happening? Well, what I have stated back in 2008 about these horsemen is that this is actually all about global government, basically breaking down the will of the population to make us believe that we need them to solve these problems. If you want to create the idea that there's such a thing as global warming or climate change, why not just use environmental technological means to create it? And of course, what that's all about is financing for the United Nations and their program and their bid for global government. There is a showdown coming up, a showdown with Yeshua Messiah. And the other reason why they're being let loose on the world is because this is part of Yahweh's plan to gather the remnant. And as we see this progress, we'll understand this more. Well, that's the red horse rider. Now we have the third seal removed. And what is that one? That's the black horse rider. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third live thing saying, "Come and see, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a balance in his hand. I heard a voice in the midst of the four live things saying, a konix of wheat for a denarius and 3 konix of barley for a denarius. Don't damage the oil and the wine." In a program that aired in July of 2008, this is what I said. This black horse rider is headed for your town, headed for where you live. This rider is headed in your direction, and you need to hear the message so that you can deal with what's coming. This black horse goes out on the west wind. It's fair to say that this suggests that the crisis that this black horse rider represents originates in the west. What it's actually talking about is an economic crisis. Now, this was in the summer that we gave this warning on our radio program, and in the fall, we got this. An economic crisis, a global economic crisis. And I'm sure you remember that. What many of us in the West might not know is that in the 8 years since 2008, 67 plus million people starved to death in the world as a result of the economic crisis. That's a lot of people. This is based on the statistics at stopthehunger.com. That's the 4 horses. Yeshua removed the 5th seal in 2015. Now, this is very interesting because 2008 was a Shemitah year, a year of release, when those 4 horsemen were released. And 2015 was a year of release when the 5th seal was removed. The 5th seal is persecution. What is shown here is the martyrs who gave their lives for Messiah. And then we're told that they must wait until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. So the fifth seal unleashes persecution of believers. August 22nd, 2008, this is what I said about the fifth seal. I think the time we're talking about in the fifth seal is different because I believe it's speaking about global conditions. Not until our modern times was that even possible. I believe these verses are actually talking about a time of global persecution, not just regional persecution. And that's what's so different about it and why we will experience that for the first time in modern times during this fifth seal. It's global persecution of believers. In this DVD set in 2015, entitled War on the Saints, I announced that the fifth seal of Revelation had been opened, meaning that unprecedented persecution of believers around the globe is upon us. Here at Christian Persecution News, it has news items that you can look at related to persecution of believers. And for instance, it has worldwide, churches have become the #1 target for hate attacks. It mentions the Sri Lanka massacre. It mentions bombings. It mentions Nigeria. There's been a lot of persecution there and killings there. And these routinely get ignored. This was a very interesting article entitled, "All the Religious Massacres You Didn't Hear About Over the Past Year Have One Thing in Common. Christians were killed instead of Muslims." And this is going on a wide scale. Sometime you should look up the map, perhaps on Google Images, of Muslims with death sentences for Christians. And it's an amazing map. It will give you some idea of how extensively Christians are being killed in Muslim lands. We don't know about all of those deaths. So keep that in mind as you look at this article from March of this year. 11 Christians are killed every day for their faith. And I should add, I came across articles that said that the persecution going on against Christians today is unprecedented. It's worse than all time, even what you've heard in the history books about Rome. It's more extensive today even than that. And of course, it continues to grow. We have this article, for example, Christians get ready for persecution in the West. And there's growing anti-Bible fervor in the West. And believers are really seen as an obstacle to where society wants to go, an obstacle that needs to be removed. So the fifth seal, having been removed, is really ominous. And unlike the first 4 seals that were removed in rapid succession, and of course, those horses are still riding, this one lasts for a long time before another happens. So how bad will this get, this persecution? Well, Yeshua told us, and he's talking about this time period, you will be handed over even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. They will cause some of you to be put to death. You will be hated by all men for my name's sake, and not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will win your lives. Now, sometimes when believers in the West read something like this, they think, oh, well, this is going to happen during the tribulation. And no doubt it will. But the fifth seal being removed means this is really going to be happening even before we get to the tribulation. And indeed, it is happening right now in many places around the world. It just hasn't gotten here to that extent in the West. But trust me, it's coming.